My name is Andrew Shan. I'm going to be a rising sophomore at Jordan High School this summer, or this fall. And this is my presentation, Corporate Control, How Companies Manipulate the Legal System for Profit. So this is the agenda for the slides. First will be the motivation for this research, then the relevant terminology and the research question, and then the thesis and methodology, then the findings of the research, and lastly, the conclusions and limitations of this research. So the federal tax rate as established under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 is 21% for major corporations. However, many of these corporations pay far less than this. Of the Fortune 500, there were 73 corporations that had an effective tax rate of 14.5% or lower, which is half of the 21% established by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. 39 of these corporations on the Fortune 500 also received money instead of paying the government, as they had an effective tax rate that was inside the negatives. As you can see on that chart, that is the average for the corporations with a negative effective tax rate and those with a 14.5% or lower effective tax rate. For the corporation that had a negative effective tax rate, on average, their pre-tax income was about $121,659 million. Their income tax that they paid was negative $4,182 million, which means they received that amount from the government on average instead. Their average tax rate was negative 3.4%, and the amount they received in tax breaks was $29,730 million. For the corporations that had a 14.5 or lower percent of effective tax rate, on their pre-tax income on average was $430,078 million. In income tax, they paid on average $22,824 million. Their average effective tax rate was 5.3%. And in tax breaks, they received on average $67,493 million. So in 2019, there was a bipartisan bill that would stop pharmaceutical corporations from drastically raising the prices of drugs. However, the pharmaceutical companies were able to block this bill and instead add a sentence inside that bill that protected their patents, which allowed them to legally raise the prices even higher than they were before. Expert estimates say there are about $20 to $30 trillion hidden in offshore tax avoidance schemes that would be used to fund things such as public policy or like schools or other types of public health aid. And a ruling by the Supreme Court in 2011 in the case AT&T Mobility LLC versus Conception declared that class action lawsuits do not need to be allowed under arbitration clauses, taking a lot of power away from the consumers, as they can now only act as individuals instead of acting as one as they would have been able to before. So here's some of the relevant terminology. There is lobbying, which is the influencing of a member of the executive or legislative branch of government. Citizens can lobby by simply calling up their mayor or governor. However, there are people called lobbyists who are paid to lobby, usually by a corporation or group, and they lobby higher members in the government, such as a senator or someone in Congress. Tax avoidance is a legal method used to reduce the amount of taxes you owe to the government. It is different from tax evasion in that tax evasion is not paying the amount of taxes you owe, while tax avoidance is a legal method used by corporations to drastically reduce the owed taxes. And a political action committee, or a PAC, is an organization that can take donations from a variety of sources and use those to fund campaigning or give political funds to a candidate. There's also something called a super PAC, which can take an unlimited amount of donations from their sources. However, they cannot be directly affiliated with a candidate. They can only campaign on their behalf. The research question for this research was, what strategies do multinational Fortune 500 companies utilize to dodge legal responsibilities and ignore government restrictions? So for the thesis statement is multinational and Fortune 500 corporations often use their vast resources, such as their overwhelming capital or access to legal power, to influence governmental policies, utilize tax breaks, and abuse legal loopholes. This picture shows the top tax havens, and some of these tax havens include like Barbados. A tax haven is a country that has a very low or 0% tax rate for large corporations, and this is where corporations move their headquarters to reduce the amount of taxes they owe drastically. Some of the other states and countries here include Ireland, Switzerland, and Hong Kong. So the methodology, I used peer-reviewed sources, specific case studies, and legal definitions. A total of 18 sources were used. They were found using JSTOR, Google Scholar, and the Duke Library online catalog. And key terms I used during my search included lobbying, multinational corporation, PACs, tax avoidance, and corporate stalling. This picture is related to a specific case study of Uber in Poland, where Uber was not classifying its workers as drivers, meaning they did not have to follow laws regarding drivers inside of Poland. And that picture shows taxi drivers protesting Uber inside of Poland. The findings for this is that corporations rarely pay the full amount of taxes they owe, and they employ many methods, as stated earlier, with tax avoidance, tax havens, shell companies as well, which they can use to reduce their taxes, and by using things like business expenses to write off their income, which means they don't have to pay money for that amount of income. For legal loopholes, it's found that corporations oftentimes do not follow the law, and the speed at which the governments can create new regulations or restrictions does not catch up with the speed at which corporations can grow, especially as more and more corporations are becoming digital in this new, as we reach the 2020s and 2021s. And influencing policy, they have many ways of influencing public policy, both legal through things like PACs or lobbying, and not necessarily legal or illegal, such as using nonprofit donations that are not classified as political, meaning the donors can remain anonymous, but they also do not have a limit on the amount they can spend. And corporate influence can drastically morph new policy. As was shown in the pharmaceutical example, they were able to transform a bill that would stop them from raising their prices into a bill that would let them keep their prices and in fact raise them even higher. The limitations for this research, it does not cover specific methods employed by these corporations. It only covers broad methods with certain ones used, for example, such as corporate stalling, as in the aforementioned Uber in Poland. This picture shows the total super PAC spending at 469 million compared to other statistics such as the combined salaries of 10,000 American teachers, the GDP of Micronesia, or Iceland's total gold reserve, which are all smaller than the total super PAC spending. Future research should cover cases where corporations were able to be held accountable for their actions and were not able to escape regulations or restrictions in the law, and to see why this was and see if this is replicatable in other states or countries. And the implications of this research are, if nothing is done to restrain or stop these corporations' growth, they will reach a point where they are unable to be stopped by a single state or country. I'd like to give my acknowledgements to Duke University for allowing us to stay on their wonderful campus for the length of this program. The amazing cohort, 2 teachers and intern that helped us along our way, including my fellow students and scholars, that we aided each other, and the Hank and Billy Suber Aaron Young Scholar Summer Research Program Institute and the Samuel Du Bois Cook Center for Social Equity for giving me the opportunity to research and present this topic. Thank you. Yes.
Oh. I wanted to ask about, for the loopholes in tax places, there's been no attempts to tighten those or anything like that, and they're still in place? Do you know if there's been anything to try to change that?
I believe there have been attempts to restrain them, but they have oftentimes been blocked by the corporations because they are lobbying the politicians, and those didn't really make it through, and those that did were oftentimes very watered down from their original versions and did almost nothing.
Thank you.